Everyone knew I was Alexander's simp. I took a knife for him, gave up everything, and had no dignity. But when I was kidnapped, Alexander mistakenly thought I had set it up to hurt his crush. He let the kidnappers punish me, his face curling with mockery. Carolina, stop acting. You make me sick. It was only later that I found out I had the wrong person. Returning to the days before the college entrance exam, under the astonished gazes of everyone, I stopped that ruffian-like boy without hesitation. Daniel. I'm here to see you. Alexander stared at me, despair mounting in his eyes. So everything you've been trying to control all along was never me? Chapter 1. When the kidnappers forced Alexander to choose between the two of us, he chose to save his crush. That, at least, I had expected. Cradling the pitiful-looking girl in his arms, Alexander looked at me with growing impatience. Carolina, have you finished your performance yet? When you're done, go back. You're disgusting. Even though the knife pressed to my throat had already drawn blood, Alexander was convinced the kidnapping in front of him was my deliberate scheme. All because the girl in his arms said, "These kidnappers treated Miss Caro much more lightly than they did with me." She said it while tilting her head on purpose, revealing the slap mark on her face. And that slap mark had been produced half an hour before Alexander arrived on her own order to the kidnappers, given in an imperious tone. Of course Alexander Law believed her, since Mr. Law has already made his choice. This one will be left to the boys, the ringleader said with a malicious grin. He tore open my clothes in front of Alexander. Alexander's gaze faltered for a moment, but soon he recovered as if nothing had happened. Carolina, he said coldly, I don't have time to play make-believe with you, but if you're going to act, have your people make it more convincing, otherwise, how am I supposed to believe this level of performance? He looked at me with that familiar contempt in his eyes. Alexander, I called him, and suddenly I smiled. I think I've done something wrong. Chapter 2. Everyone knew I was Alexander's simp, a simp to the point of losing all dignity, summoned and dismissed by him at will. Even if Alexander was sick of me, I would rush out in the middle of the night at the sound of a phone call to pick him up, only to be mocked by his friends, really like a dog. I would nurse a fever and still prepare a banquet for Alexander, even if it was a celebration for his crush, until I saw a photograph in his study. Alexander had a twin brother no one knew about. He had died at 17. I stared blankly at the scrawled name Daniel on the photo, a reckless handwriting, and felt a strange sense that I had done something wrong. So I spent a lot of effort digging into anything about Daniel, but there was almost nothing to find. The only thing I learned was that when Daniel Law was 17 he had been accused of attempted sexual assault on a girl. The Law family felt the shame and suppressed every piece of news. They erased Daniel's existence along with it. I refused to believe it instinctively, but before I could uncover the truth, I was kidnapped. Chapter 3. Alexander didn't react right away. After a moment, he pulled up a cold smile. How rare. I thought you always believed everything you did was right. Alexander despised me, largely because I was someone placed by his parents to stay by his side. He thought my existence was a form of surveillance. Even worse, a kind of humiliation. Just this one thing. The pain in my body had already numbed. Alexander's crush was no saint. She had these men aim at the places my clothes covered. I swallowed the metallic taste in my throat and whispered, "This is the only thing I did wrong." Alexander actually laughed. He seemed about to say more, but suddenly froze. Because the kidnappers, after receiving orders, directly threw me, hands and feet bound, off the boat. That was probably not something Alexander had expected. The second before I was thrown down, I vaguely saw Alexander instinctively rush toward me, but it didn't matter anymore. Chapter 4. It seemed I had been reborn. I stared blankly at the washed-out, ill-fitting clothes on me, and at the pair of slender, pale hands full of calluses. In the years by Alexander's side, I had always taken care of myself. Those calluses had long been gone, but now, I was being violently dragged along, accompanied by familiar insults. A girl studying? I say you've just been spoiled by others. You think you've grown wings, what can you possibly learn? In the end, it's still going to benefit someone else. What's wrong with the match your family found for you? I'm telling you, I've already taken the money. Whether you want to marry or not, you'll marry. Your younger brother still needs that money to buy a house. For a moment I was stunned, forgetting to struggle, letting that so-called mother of mine drag me several meters across the ground. The thin fabric tore, scraping large patches of skin raw. The pain pulled my thoughts back. I instinctively tried to break free. Let me go! But this malnourished body was no match for a woman hardened by farm labor. The dark memories I had tried so hard to forget surged back with bone-deep terror, drowning me instantly. Clenching my teeth, I swallowed the scream. One hand pulled back with all its strength, while the other fumbled inside my school bag. I had always kept a utility knife in there. Just as I managed to grip it, a brash voice, only present in my memories, rang out. Fuck. Are human traffickers this bold now? In broad daylight you dare to snatch a decent girl? That familiar tone, those familiar words. I stared blankly at the backlit boy, not knowing why my chest suddenly ached so badly. Chapter 5. It was the same in my previous life. During lunch break, hardly anyone passed along this road. My mother tricked me out with some excuse, then tried to forcibly drag me back home. It was Daniel who appeared and stopped her. He gave my mother a sum of money, telling her not to disturb my studies anymore. Later, when I didn't have money for school, a company sponsored me. The owner of that company had the surname Law. What a hair! Daniel Law opened his mouth, but seeing my mother's short hair, he forcibly changed his words. Short hair, short vision. Impatiently, he pulled a wallet from his school uniform pocket and took out a stack of bills. Isn't it just money you want? Take it. From now on, don't disturb her studies again. My mother immediately lit up with joy. She licked her finger, counted through it, then shamelessly pretended to hesitate. Sir, this isn't quite enough. Daniel clicked his tongue. At 16 or 17, the boy's posture was tall and striking, just standing there could draw a crowd of eyes. He slipped off the ring on his hand, intending to toss it to my mother. Take this and pawn it. My mother instantly beamed and reached to grab it, but I snatched it first. Her face darkened, and she raised her hand as if to slap me. You cheap little brat. But the blow never fell, because my utility knife was aimed right at her. That man only gave you 1,000 as bride price. I panted, glaring at her. This stack is at least 2,000, more than enough. Only 1,000 to marry a wife? What an idiot simp. Daniel's voice was full of disdain. He edged closer to me without drawing attention, perfectly blocking my mother's way forward. My grip on the utility knife tightened, my face blank. If you keep playing dirty, I don't mind dragging you down with me. Aren't you always doting on that precious son of yours? Maybe it was the nearly self-destructive resolve in my eyes that scared her. She no longer dared to ask for the ring. Cursing under her breath with a few filthy words, she finally fled in a hurry. I held the knife up, unmoving. Not until her figure completely disappeared. Not until Daniel suddenly chuckled, lifting a hand to lightly pat my head. Teasing. Skinny and frail as you look. Who'd have thought you'd pull out a knife? What? Planning to kill someone already at your age? I didn't reply. I simply put the knife away in silence, and then stared quietly at Daniel. He did look exactly like the Alexander the First knew, only much younger. The only real difference was the tiny black mole on the tip of Daniel's nose. But you wouldn't notice it without looking closely. Why are you staring at me like that? Daniel awkwardly touched his nose, then exaggerated a laugh. What? Are you silently admitting you're really bold enough to kill? I still didn't answer. Daniel paused, muttering under his breath. Damn. Chapter 6. Daniel didn't go back to school. Instead, he wandered aimlessly through the streets. I followed Daniel, until he grew increasingly impatient. What? You planning to follow me into the men's restroom too? He deliberately emphasized the words men's restroom. My eyes dropped to the school jacket tied around his waist, and I asked out of nowhere, why aren't you going to class? It wasn't lunchtime anymore. Then why aren't you going? Daniel gave a short laugh of disbelief, throwing the question back at me. I've taken leave. That shut him up, his expression souring a little. I thought Daniel would get angry, but instead he just raised a hand to ruffle his own hair, then pointed at me. I blinked in confusion. Your brother here has a mission, to save pitiful girls like you. His face was full of mock sincerity. Studying only slows down my path to becoming a hero of the world. So childish. completely different from Alexander, but I still mistook him. In that instant, an indescribable despair and sorrow pressed down on me, suffocating. My body swayed, scaring Daniel. "Hey, what's wrong with you, girl? What's your name?" My own voice came out hoarse as I grabbed Daniel's arm. His frame was lean, but his forearm muscles were firm. I saw his lips forming a word, so I cut him off. "At least tell me your name, so I'll know who to pay back later." Earlier, I had wanted to return the ring to Daniel, but he refused. To me, it's just a useless decoration. He tossed the ring straight into my school bag without a glance. "But at least it's worth some cash. Unlike you, your brother here has never been short of money, so there was a reason to repay him." I stared at Daniel without blinking, staring until his eyes wavered and he instinctively looked away. "Didn't think so. Turns out this little girl's got quite a grip." He suddenly laughed, then easily pulled his arm free. "You really gonna pay me back?" "Yes. That little trinket may just be a metal band, but it's still kinda pricey. One day, I'll be able to." "Stubborn girl," he muttered under his breath. But soon he grinned, raising a hand to tap me lightly on the head. "All right then, remember this, Daniel. My name is Daniel." Chapter 7. After telling me his name, Daniel refused to say more. On the way back, I tried to start a conversation with him, but every time I tried to learn a little more about him, he cleverly sidestepped the topic. That same carefree, cocky smile remained plastered on his face, so I could only set my curiosity aside for now. "You're a good student." At the school gates, Daniel suddenly threw out this random comment. I blinked, not reacting at first. Then, realizing, I lifted my head to look at him. "You know me?" "The top student who's always ahead of Alexander, Carolina." Daniel grinned. "Of course I know you." I had so many questions I wanted to ask Daniel, but the security guard had already noticed us. "Hey, you two students, why are you still outside during class time? Skipping school to go on a date?" "No." I instinctively turned to explain, but before the words fully left my mouth, I felt a light voice brush against my ear, carried by the fresh, clean breath of the boy beside me. He said, "Keep going forward. I'm counting on you to keep that arrogant brat in check." Daniel chuckled under his breath, then turned and ran off before the guard could reach us. He didn't look back, but as if knowing I was watching, he raised a hand casually over his shoulder, waving. Afternoon sunlight spilled over his hair, catching a faint red sheen beneath the black. I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks, but in the next moment, he disappeared into the shadows of the corner wall. And that other boy? Not from our school? You kids these days. The security guard came up, raising his voice, scolding endlessly. I listened quietly, but when I slipped a hand into my pocket and felt something hard, I froze. Daniel's ring. I had already returned it once, slipping it back when he wasn't looking, but Daniel must have shoved it back into my uniform pocket before he left. I already owed Daniel too much. "Keep going forward." That lazy, drawling voice seemed to echo in my ears again. The guard's lecturing droned on. I gripped the ring tightly, tugging at the corner of my lips with a faint smile. "Fine. Once you owe too much, it all feels the same." Chapter 8. For me, returning to high school wasn't something to be happy about. The oppression from my original family, the strange looks and bullying from classmates, the favoritism of teachers, all of it had once been enough to make me collapse and shrink into my own little world, filled with inferiority, until I met Daniel. Until I met Daniel again. "Why is it you again?" Daniel, a cigarette dangling from his lips, looked at me in mild surprise and clicked his tongue. "You should go to a temple one of these days with that dark aura between your brows. You've clearly got bad luck clinging to you." He said it with meaning. Behind him were a few girls, shivering after being scared off by the gang of street punks Daniel had brought along. Silently, I picked up my books that had been scattered in the mud and stepped on several times. Just like in my previous life, these people still found joy in bullying me, and just like in my previous life, Daniel appeared to step in for me. If there was any difference, it was that I hadn't been beaten unconscious this time, and Daniel didn't just drop me off at the hospital and leave right away. He ruffled his hair, crouched down, and helped me gather the books. I'm serious. Daniel pouted. Both times I've seen you. You were being bullied. You really don't want to go pray at that temple? I know one that's pretty effective. He laughed at his own words. Don't tell me, I really do feel like some kind of hero saving the damsel. Daniel, you may be the hero, but this girl hardly counts as the beauty. One of his little followers couldn't hold back and chimed in. Shut the hell up. Daniel cursed him out. He was about to comfort me, but when he caught sight of my dry hair and ill-fitting, worn-out uniform, he fell into an awkward silence. Finally, he turned his head stiffly and asked the underling he'd brought along, "Got any tissues or a handkerchief? Didn't you say carrying that kind of stuff makes a guy look girly?" Daniel choked on that. Instinctively, he glanced at the pale-faced girls nearby, then turned away in disgust. Forget it. Using theirs would just be unlucky. With a cold snort, Daniel simply raised his sleeve and wiped the dirty water off the books, then handed them to me. He didn't care in the least about dirtying that expensive jacket. Here, see if the notes inside are still usable. The hand holding out the books was long and pale, but somehow his fingertips had picked up stains. Suddenly, I remembered when I woke up in the hospital in my last life. The stack of books on the nightstand had been carefully wiped clean, placed neatly within reach. Daniel. I came back to myself. I didn't open the book but lifted my head to look at him, forcing down the tremor in my voice. I can't find you. Chapter 9. I couldn't find Daniel, other than knowing his name, and that he was Alexander's older brother. I knew nothing about him. I remembered the school jacket tied around his waist that day. It was the standard issue for No. 1 high school. But there was no Daniel in No. 1 high school. Only Alexander. And Daniel would die quietly at 17, this very year. But I couldn't find him. Not in my last life. Not in this one. That knowledge triggered a rising panic in me, so I decided to take a gamble. I followed those girls, listening to their unrestrained insults and jeers, watching as they tore my bag away and stomped mercilessly on the books inside. And then Daniel appeared. He raised an eyebrow, looking at me with disdain and exasperation. Why is it you again? Chapter 10. Daniel was stunned by my words. He almost reacted instinctively. You can't beat me. As soon as the words left his mouth, one of Daniel's underlings couldn't hold back and burst out laughing, realizing what he'd said. Daniel gave an awkward cough, then shoved the books back into my hands. He pointed at himself. Am your standard street punk. Then he pointed at me. And you're the good student who can outscore Alexander on the national exams. If you start hanging around with me, what the hell would that look like? Daniel laughed at his own words. But when he met my silent gaze, the smile on his face slowly faded. Wait, you're serious? His tone was gradually growing frantic. I even heard him mutter under his breath. Shit. If James finds out you want to follow me, he'll kill me for sure. James was my homeroom teacher in my first year. The only teacher who treated me truly well. Daniel knew James. He might even have been close with him. I quietly took note of that. Then called softly, Daniel. What? I gave him a smile, then walked straight up to the girl leading the group. A string of crisp slaps rang out. Everyone, including Daniel, was stunned. Only the girl screamed hysterically. There's a fruit knife in my bag. My tone was calm as I went on. I don't actually have anything, so I don't care about losing anything. Alexander once called me a calm lunatic. That time, a man was slashing people in the street, and Alexander had been out with his crush who had just returned from abroad. I stepped in and took a blow for Alexander, and with that one cut as the price, I managed to subdue the man. Alexander was terrified, his hands trembling as they pressed against my wound. Lunatic. He cursed me, eyes red. No matter how calm you pretend to be, deep down you're still a lunatic. I said nothing, just smiled at him. At that time, I thought Alexander was Daniel, so I had to protect him. He hadn't been wrong. I really was a lunatic. Are you scared? I looked at the girl, who abruptly shut her mouth. I gave her a reassuring smile. There's nothing to be afraid of, after all. I haven't even gotten the chance yet. Damn. Daniel jumped up first. He muttered a string of curses under his breath, then yanked me to his side, pulling me away from the girl. Then he bent down, glaring. Where the hell did you get another knife? Didn't I already take your utility knife? The ring you gave me can buy plenty. Daniel froze, his expression hardening, his voice rising sharply. Did I tell you to pawn that thing just to buy knives? So, Daniel, I'm not the good student you think I am. I lifted my head, locking my gaze on him. Long ago, when my parents beat me and forbade me from studying, when I was bullied again and again, that thread called reason had been pulled taut. So taut that even a single straw could snap it entirely. My utility knife had never left my side. That's why Daniel, in my past life, would never know that he once, by accident, did something so great. So Daniel, I licked my dry lips, carefully gripping the edge of his jacket. Can I stay with you? In my past life, I had followed Alexander countless times, only to make him despise me more. But this time, I wanted to follow Daniel. I wanted to protect him. I just didn't want him to hate me. So I quickly let go of his jacket and waited quietly for judgment. Daniel's underlings gasped sharply, then started jeering. But Daniel didn't move, not until a long while later. 3 strikes. He bent down, picked up my bag, and pulled out the fruit knife. Clicking his tongue, he stared at it for a moment, then shoved it back inside, along with the books he'd wiped clean. Then he handed the whole thing to me, and he said, at our 3rd meeting, I'll give you my answer. Chapter 11. Maybe he was shocked by what I did that day, but Daniel had his underlings take turns following me. They only left once they saw me safely home. Because of the money Daniel had given, my mother stayed quiet for a while, though from time to time, she would raise her voice, muttering insults in a roundabout way. That little beast I raised actually dared to threaten me with a knife? What a rebellion against heaven. But she never said it to my face, and she didn't dare hit me, because my father was away working out of town. I ignored her. Sometimes, I'd even sharpen my knife right in front of her, so frightened that my mother kept warning my younger brother not to get near me. As for the classmates who ganged up on me that day, they were punished. It was James himself who confronted their parents. Those kids still wanted to argue, but James didn't waste a word. He simply played a video right there in front of the parents. The video had been given by Daniel. Maybe in my past life, he had done the same. Nothing was more convincing than that video. Even when those girls accused me of carrying a fruit knife to threaten them, no one believed it. So I became the clear, unquestionable victim of the bullying. They were forced to bow their heads and apologize to me publicly. When the office was finally empty, James asked me, "Where's the knife?" Earlier, one of the girls had shouted for my bag to be searched, but nothing had been found. After a long silent standoff with James, I finally patted the pocket of my uniform. His eyes widened. He was so furious he had to gulp down a cup of cold tea before he calmed. A troublemaker will always be a troublemaker. He cursed, pointing at me. Just like Daniel, both of you are stubborn brats who can't be controlled. No wonder that punk kept reminding me to watch you. I thought you were a quiet little girl, but turns out you're just as dark as him. I stood in silence, listening to the scolding. Unexpectedly, that only made James angrier. He slammed the desk. Even that dead pig no fear look of yours is exactly the same as Daniel's. Only the warning bell for class finally cut his lecture short. Carolina, remember this. He waved me off toward class, then stopped me again, face stern. There are many roads you can walk. If this one doesn't work, change paths. You think the living will let themselves suffocate to death? Your life is still long. Don't ruin it all for one impulsive act. I nodded, then asked him, "Why doesn't Daniel come to school?" Daniel? James wasn't surprised at my question. He cursed with a laugh. You two think I'm some kind of intelligence officer? If you want to know about him, ask him yourself. All I can say is, Daniel has his own road to walk. I nodded, showing I understood. I didn't know what Daniel's road was, but I knew one thing, this time. I'd do everything I could to make sure Daniel could keep walking it, safe and untroubled. That was the road I had chosen for myself. Chapter 12. The next time I saw Daniel was a week later, at a physics competition. The competition was held at another school, and he had come to pick up Alexander. It was also the first time I saw Alexander since my rebirth. His frame was much thinner than Daniel's, and his face carried a gentle, approachable smile, though they shared exactly the same features. By now I could easily tell them apart. My seat happened to be right in front of Alexander's. When he saw me, he looked slightly stunned, then gave me a faint, stiff smile, far from the sharpness and mockery of my past life. I quickly looked away again, quietly waiting for the competition to start. Do I hate Alexander? Not really. After all, from the beginning, it was me who mistook him for someone else. And it was me who stubbornly followed him, thinking I was doing good by staying close, constantly entangling him. It was only natural that Alexander disliked me. Chapter 13. Alexander handed in his paper a few minutes earlier than me. When I left the school gates, I happened to see him standing with Daniel. Daniel wore a baseball cap and a mask, his hand casually resting on Alexander's shoulder. His whole air of carelessness was completely different from Alexander's. I walked straight toward Daniel. Alexander spotted me first. He froze for a moment, instinctively wanting to turn his head away, but couldn't stop the faint upward curl at the corner of his lips. From start to finish, Alexander's gaze remained on me, until he saw me pass him by and stop beside Daniel. Daniel. I looked only at him. I came to see you. This was our third meeting. Daniel had said that on the third meeting, he would give me the answer I wanted. You recognized me even though I'm disguised like this? Daniel looked surprised, then laughed and cursed. Persistent brat. Wanna grab a meal? Daniel's buying. I nodded. I didn't look at Alexander, so I didn't notice how. The moment I said the name Daniel, the color drained from his face, leaving it pale as paper. Ale. You coming? Daniel asked Alexander again. It's just a cheap noodle shop. Might not be to your taste. Alexander was born into wealth. Everything he ate, drank, and used had to be exquisite. He was notoriously picky. In that, Daniel couldn't have been more different. I thought Alexander would refuse. Yes. But unexpectedly, he agreed. His voice was hoarse. Chapter 14. The noodle shop owner was clearly familiar with Daniel, even bringing out extra side dishes for us. Daniel and I ate with satisfaction. Only Alexander set his chopsticks down after a few bites, frowning despite himself. Knew you wouldn't like it, Daniel mocked, handing him a bottle of water. Better let Uncle Wong come pick you up. No need. Alexander refused. His eyes stayed on me, filled with emotions I couldn't read. How did you meet my brother? Daniel saved me. I thought for a moment, then decided to tell him. Twice. So I'm very grateful to him. This little girl's the one I told you about before. Daniel popped open a beer, then raised an eyebrow at me. Drink? I shook my head. He laughed. Look at that. A girl who neither smokes nor drinks, yet bold enough to pull a knife on people bullying her. That seemed to shock Alexander. His lips moved slightly before he whispered. I never knew. You think just 'cause your brain works a bit faster than mine, you know everything? Daniel had clearly misunderstood Alexander's words, and Alexander didn't bother to explain. Not long after, Uncle Wang arrived to pick him up. You know second young master's health is poor, and you still bring him to a place like this? When facing Daniel, Uncle Wang's attitude was far less respectful than it was toward Alexander. There was even a trace of resentment in his tone. In my impression, because Alexander's health was fragile, the entire Law family treated him with extreme care. But even so, the way this man spoke to Daniel made a surge of anger rise in me. I stepped in front of Daniel, my tone sharp. It was Alexander who insisted on coming. Daniel tried to dissuade him. Alexander's eyelashes trembled. He looked up at me, as if in disbelief. Daniel, on the other hand, just chuckled, giving me a light push and teasing. Standing in front of me like a shield? If something really happened, you think that tiny frame of yours could block anyone? That was always his lazy, careless attitude, even when misunderstood. He never bothered to explain. And suddenly, a wave of nameless anger welled up inside me, anger at Uncle Wang, and at Daniel too. I glared at him fiercely. He must have sensed I was truly angry. Daniel awkwardly rubbed the tip of his nose, then expertly began to placate me. I was only joking. Our Carolina is so fierce, she could take down 10 grown men by herself. I didn't answer, just kept glaring at him. It was really me who wanted to come. Alexander suddenly said, his voice raw and strained, has nothing to do with my brother. Uncle Wang looked embarrassed, But in the end he just glanced at Daniel and then left with Alexander. "You're gonna stare yourself blind." A cool touch on my cheek. Daniel was pressing a cold can of cola to the side of my face. "Your face is all flushed. Don't even know what you're mad about." He said it, but his eyes were full of little amused smiles. "Why didn't you explain?" I suddenly remembered the information I'd gathered about Daniel in my last life: uneducated, violent, a troublemaker. Those words had practically become his label. But I didn't believe it. Daniel thought for a moment. Then, seemingly quite seriously, answered me, "Because I don't have a mouth?" "Daniel." He made a sound, then slammed his palm down hard on my head. "You aren't deaf. Daniel can hear you. You obviously. Alexander and I look exactly the same." Daniel cut me off. He leaned down. Those bright eyes stared at me with a rare seriousness. "He's handsome, good-natured, and does well in school. If you want someone to chase after, or you simply like a pretty face, he's the better choice. If you're only grateful because I helped you before, that's unnecessary." Daniel chuckled lightly. He straightened, his voice casual. "I've got a lot of flaws. If there's anything good about me, it's that I get soft sometimes. See a kitten or a puppy thrown out on the road, I'll give it a sausage. See a beggar, toss a coin or two. So a pitiable little girl? How could I not do something?" The anger inside me slowly calmed. I watched Daniel quietly and felt his deliberate detachment again. He seemed not to care about anything, but I noticed his hand, hanging at his side, was trembling slightly as he spoke, saying one thing, meaning another. So I told him, "When I was born my mother tried to strangle me. She wanted a son. She'd already had 2 daughters. She failed because the villagers stopped her. Later she wanted to sell me, but I knew the way home. I found my way back. They didn't want me to study because they thought daughters would just end up cheap for someone else. The money was better spent on a pretty outfit for a son, so I fought to earn my tuition, to give them no excuse to force me to quit." Daniel fell silent too. "So Daniel, you'll never know how heroic you were that day when you stopped my mother." My vision began to blur. Even Daniel's figure grew hazy. Alexander is a good person, but even if he were the best person in the world, he's not the light I want to chase. So even if you don't actually need, my mouth opened, and I couldn't finish. What if Daniel didn't need me? What if, like Alexander, he had no use for a useless repayment like mine? I suddenly felt lost, a little helpless. Then Daniel burst out laughing. He laughed exaggeratedly, covering his face with his hand, shoulders shaking. "I've never heard anyone call themselves light on my behalf," he said between gasps. "I usually just hear people calling me garbage or mud." When he'd laughed enough, he lowered his hand and looked at me with a smile. Then, in that resigned but accepting tone, he repeated, "Carolina, you really are a strange stubborn one, but, kind of like me." He added the last line with a bright grin. Chapter 15. Daniel allowed me to stay by his side. I thought it meant I could repay him more, but in truth, most of the time, it was Daniel taking care of me. Every time he bought breakfast, he'd buy an extra portion, saying one of his underlings had quit but he was used to buying the same amount. "If you don't want it, let Jordan throw it out." So I had breakfast every day. Daniel always asked me to tell him more funny stories from school whenever we met. When there's nothing to do, boredom creeps in. "So you look for entertainment." Daniel snorted with a laugh. "I remember no. Too High has a ton of weirdos. Make sure you tell me about them." "Don't know? Then go ask around." I didn't interact with people much, so naturally I knew nothing about No. Too High's oddities. But this was what Daniel wanted to hear, so I began trying to connect with classmates around me, then would recite the gossip and strange stories from school to Daniel word for word. Every time, Daniel laughed until he cried. "I really want to know how you manage to keep a straight face while saying something so funny." Wiping tears from his eyes, he encouraged me. "Keep it up. No. Too High's got a whole bunch more weirdos waiting for you to discover." So I continued reaching out to more classmates, chatting gossip, retelling the quirks of No. Too High, until one day, even my usually distant deskmate sighed. "I used to think you were some aloof top student too proud to talk to us. Didn't think you also liked gossip. Guess even a straight-A student like you and I have something in common." That was when I realized I'd grown much closer to my classmates. For the first time, I felt like I was truly part of this class. The next time I met Daniel, I told him earnestly, "I want to really do something for you." Daniel smiled, then countered, "Do you think repaying someone can only be a one-way effort?" His question stunned me. In those years when I mistook Alexander for Daniel, that was exactly how I behaved. I obeyed Alexander, protected him, did everything for him, even if it annoyed him. That was how I tried to repay Alexander. For 5 years. Isn't that what it means? Daniel didn't seem surprised by my reaction. Patiently, he asked, "You told me all that gossip from No. Too High to keep me entertained, didn't you?" After a pause, I nodded, and it made me happy, so couldn't that count as repayment already? I mumbled a quiet agreement. Then what are you struggling with? Daniel's eyes curved with a smile. Carolina, why can't you try a way that makes you happy too? Daniel told me even repayment could follow a different road, one that didn't have to be covered in thorns, one where you could meet people who were warm. You're too young to be thinking so much. Daniel laughed, cursing affectionately. Fine, if you really want to do something, just lend me your notes for a few days. Most of the boys under him had dropped out due to family circumstances. Daniel always said he was leading a gang of punks, but after meeting him, none of them had ever done bad things again. Even being a punk nowadays, you need education, Daniel told me with rare seriousness. Otherwise you might get insulted on the street and still think people are complimenting you. Notes from the future top scorer of the college entrance exam, of course, were the ones earning here. Daniel never doubted I'd be the top scorer. He used to think his younger brother would be the one, but since I had outscored Alexander in the national exams, to him, I was even more capable. In reality, when my notes were returned, they had been organized with even greater detail, especially in math. Key points I had overlooked were highlighted, even thoughtfully linked to the knowledge we'd studied before. Daniel said maybe one of his boys had talent and got discovered, but Jordan quietly told me that those notes were all organized by Daniel. Daniel's terrible at the humanities, but his math is especially good. Jordan said it with a proud look on his face. Then why doesn't he come to school? This was the second time I'd asked, and I got the same answer again. Well, you'll have to ask Daniel yourself. Jordan scratched his head, looking uncomfortable. Daniel doesn't want us to talk about it. So I went to ask Daniel. I thought you'd wait a while before asking, he said, biting on a cigarette. He put it out when he got close to me, then took a step back. Will you tell me? I stared at Daniel's red hair. What I'd seen that day wasn't an illusion. Daniel had dyed his hair a showy red. While the first time I met him he'd been standing in for sick Alexander at school, wearing a black wig. No, Daniel answered honestly. You little blockhead. It's not good for you to learn too much about me. He called me Wood, like a block of wood, as a nickname. And I didn't press further. Instead I recopied the notes Daniel had organized for me and distributed them to classmates. Soon it was the end-of-month test. My God, after the exam, my desk mate came at me bouncing and shouting, "Caro, your notes literally saved me, especially in science. I missed several points but they showed up on the test. Aw, I love you so much." A few other classmates who'd used the notes also came to thank me. That drew the attention of everyone else. What notes? What notes? Genius saved me. I lent them the notes and then told them. They weren't mine, Daniel organized them. Daniel? A classmate who was always first with news changed expression. You mean Daniel, Alexander's twin brother from number 1? I froze, then nodded. Yes. I don't want them. He immediately tossed the notes back with disgust. That scum who could have raped girls in middle school and ruined lives, what good notes could that trash possibly have? I advise you to stay away from him. That kind of scum might offend again one day, just a spoiled brat acting out because his family has money. He kept calling him scum, trash, looking down his nose in contempt. Then, not satisfied, he stomped several times as if the notes were filthy mud. When those words came out, everyone froze. I stared at the obvious footprints on the notes, my mind going blank. By the time I snapped back, I was grappling with that boy. Chapter 16. Of course, my mom would never come to the school, and James happened to be away on a business trip. In the end, it was Daniel who found someone to handle the matter for me. I finally understand why you insist on sticking to me. Daniel sneered. You're just looking for someone to clean up your messes like a substitute dad, aren't you? I lowered my head and stayed silent. Even though I was actually 8 years older than 17-year-old Daniel, I still couldn't muster the courage to talk back when he scolded me. But what I didn't expect was that Alexander also showed up. He stood quietly beside Daniel, his eyes dark as he watched him tend to my wounds. Then, when Daniel stepped out for a moment, Alexander suddenly spoke. Carolina doesn't know how to fight. My hands didn't falter as I continued bandaging myself. So he repeated softly, 16-year-old Carolina doesn't know how to fight. Because she's timid, cowardly, afraid of trouble, but 25-year-old Carolina does. She fights fiercely. As he went on, Alexander's voice trembled noticeably. He stared at me with reddened eyes, and finally choked out, So Carolina, you came back too, didn't you? Chapter 17. I actually rarely think back to my high school years, but Alexander's certain remark, because she's timid and cowardly, afraid of causing trouble, made me smile for no reason. You're not wrong. I smiled at Alexander, my eyes curving. So 16-year-old Carolina was forcibly taken home after that bullying incident. She couldn't take the college entrance exam. Afterwards, she only managed to retake and go to university thanks to the Law family's financial support. At that near-confessional admission, Alexander's eyes instantly brightened. She accepted the Law family's favor and should repay them. Later, she saw the boy who had pulled her up back then at the Law household, and she felt she ought to repay this family even more. I paused, then shook my head helplessly. I never regret what I've done. But Alexander, this time I think I really was wrong. Carolina. Alexander vaguely sensed what I wanted to say. His breathing quickened. His health was poor. Now he was gasping for breath, clutching his chest. His face drained of color. So I didn't continue. If anything happened to Alexander, Daniel would be very worried. I wasn't surprised by Alexander's rebirth, not because I'd already guessed it. Rather, for who I am now. Whether he was 17 or 25 didn't really matter much to me anymore. Alexander understood me too. After he calmed a little, he asked through gritted teeth, So what you've been caring about all along was never me? So after you learned the truth, you didn't even bother to spare a thought for me, did you? I didn't say a word. Alexander's expression slipped toward despair. He stepped forward and grabbed my wrist so hard it felt like he wanted to crush me. He asked each word as if extracting it from me. Why do you think saying I was wrong of me lets this whole thing just pass easily? Carolina. Why? So I paid the price. His grip hurt, but it was still within what I could bear. I smiled at Alexander and said softly, So I died. Isn't that price enough for you to get your revenge? Perhaps the word died touched a particularly sensitive nerve in Alexander. He let go of my hand and managed a bitter smile. Yes. So you died. You deserved to die. Alexander had lost his former gentleness. He barbed me again. Carolina, you should have seen what you looked like after you died. When they pulled you out, your body was waterlogged and swollen. Swollen so much that they couldn't even make out your face. You should have seen how grotesque you were after death. He seemed to be trying to provoke my anger with those words. But Alexander didn't know that long ago I had discarded useless emotions like that. So I sighed. Then it must have been a bother for you to spend money fishing my corpse up. Huh? That made Alexander choke on his words. He was about to say more but was interrupted by Daniel coming in. What corpse? He caught a few words and looked at the two of us with some suspicion before snorting with amusement. You only hurt your hand, didn't you? Don't worry. You won't die. But if you pick a fight again next time, I swear I'll beat you to death first. Daniel stared at me, then pulled a sinister smile. I turned my head, pretending not to hear, which made him reach out and ruffle my hair while calling me a stubborn blockhead. Alexander watched our interaction in silence. Chapter 18. In the end, the fight was left unsettled. But because of it, I finally learned why Daniel couldn't continue his schooling. Back then, someone had seen a girl stumble out of an alley, her clothes disheveled, her face filled with terror. She ran in such panic that she didn't see the road ahead and dashed straight onto the street, where she was struck by a car. Moments later, Daniel came running out after her. The girl didn't die, but she was left in a vegetative state and has been lying in the hospital ever since. That area had no cameras, so Daniel, who came out right after her, became the supposed culprit in everyone's eyes. even though Daniel explained again and again that it wasn't him, that he had only been trying to save the girl, because the man who attempted to assault her was never found, and the only person who could prove Daniel's innocence was unconscious in a hospital bed. Everyone dismissed his words as an excuse. No one believed him, not even his own parents, because everyone thought Daniel was just a delinquent, and a delinquent's words can't be trusted. What the Law family parents did was to force Daniel to withdraw from school, bring him back to the Law household, and suppress the matter with sheer power. Back then Daniel wasn't a delinquent at all. James told me this with anger flashing on his face. He only wanted to give those kids a chance to turn their lives around, that's why he spent time with them. But no one believed him except me. No one believed. Not the teachers or classmates. Not even Daniel's parents. No one could believe someone would be kind enough to try guiding a bunch of so-called troublemakers onto the right path. Especially not a middle schooler. Do you know why Daniel fights? James asked me again. I fell silent for a while before answering, because of Alexander. Alexander's health was poor, and the entire Law family treated him like fragile glass. But they couldn't possibly keep someone by his side every hour of the day. So the one who spent the most time with him was Daniel. See? Even you know the reason. How could his parents not understand it? James's smile turned bitter with mockery. I recalled Mr. and Mrs. Law from my past life and thought maybe they had known from the beginning. The Law family always cared about reputation above all else. Even if Daniel fought only to protect Alexander, once he raised his fists, he shifted from victim to perpetrator. The Law parents could accept Daniel being a temporary victim, but not him becoming a constant aggressor. So, between Daniel and Alexander, they chose Alexander, the obedient, well-behaved, academically excellent son who could bring more benefit to the Law family. Carolina. James patted my shoulder with a sigh. Sometimes I really think you two are quite alike. Chapter 19. The matter resurfaced once again. What the Law family had forcefully suppressed back then now came back with even harsher backlash. And the one who triggered it all was me. I went to look for Daniel, but couldn't find him. I thought he was angry, but before I could figure out a way to find him and explain, my father came back. He dragged me away on the excuse that I fought and refused to obey. And no one stopped him, maybe because they felt the head of the household had returned. My mother exaggerated everything, adding fuel to the fire about how reckless and out of control I had been lately. In a few years, she'll probably run off with some random man. She cursed me with the vilest words. Even my little brother joined in, throwing a toy car at me. Don't you dare run. Stay and give me money for toys. The iron toy car struck my temple. Blood ran down, blurring my eyes, and I just stared quietly at this family, maybe reminded by my mother. The first thing my father did after dragging me home was strip me of my clothes and uncover the knife I had hidden on me. I stood nearly naked before them. My emotions dulled to numbness. They locked me up at home. As punishment, my mother starved me for days. The bit of flesh Daniel had helped me recover was gone completely. Does that family still want her? I heard my father ask my mother, go talk to them, tell them to add more bride price. We'll just marry this wretched girl off. They hid every sharp object in the house. To keep me from escaping, they tied my hands and feet almost all the time, except when eating. It felt like I had returned to the darkest days of my past life. But this time, I was calm. I had thought of an escape, at worst. We'd go down together. What I hadn't expected was that Alexander would burst in with the police on the very day they planned to sell me to that old man. Chapter 20. To avoid any mishaps. Those two practically sealed the deal as soon as the price was agreed. Ready to marry me off immediately. The man was already wearing an outdated bright red wedding robe. People around him were happily congratulating him, paying no mind to the fact that I was bound hand and foot. That was when Alexander barged in with the police. Animals. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled as he untied me. Then he stripped off his coat and draped it over the blinding red wedding robe on me. But beyond that one word, Alexander said nothing else. Someone reported you for suspected illegal abduction. It's just an engagement. Just an engagement. My father explained with a forced smile to the police. Girls from the countryside marry earlier. We're only letting her get engaged first. The wedding will wait until she's of age. That's not against the law. Yes. Yes. Exactly. My mother echoed quickly. And besides, this is a family matter. The police shouldn't interfere with private family affairs. right? The man stood frozen, dumbfounded, not daring to say a word. I'm reporting them. My voice was hoarse from days without water or food. I'm reporting them for human trafficking. The moment those words left my mouth, the police officer's expressions turned grave. Chapter 21. I once had a sister, but after I was old enough to do chores, I never saw her at home again, because my mother sold her. She was sold to an old widower to bear children. It was her so-called father who tied her up and delivered her to that man's house. And to keep her from running away, he broke her legs with his own hands. So from a very young age, I knew what kind of fate awaited me. When they discovered I had a gift for studying, they decided to send me to school, because a girl with an education fetched a higher price. I thought my sister was the first, but later I learned this wasn't their first time, and my sister wasn't the first girl they destroyed. In my previous life, I spent so much effort gathering evidence, and finally sent them to prison with my own hands. This time, it was much easier. I led the police to the basement of our house, where 3 unconscious girls were locked up. In my mother's room, there was also a ledger. It recorded every girl they had trafficked over the years, and the price each was sold for. The newest entry was my name. Price, 3,000 yuan. Chapter 22. With such solid evidence, those 2 were taken away by the police on the spot. Before being dragged out, my father glared at me viciously, gasping for breath, while my mother hurled the foulest curses, wishing me a miserable death. My little brother, only 6 years old, raised his iron toy car and charged at me without fear, shouting, "I'll beat you to death, you worthless burden." Alexander stepped in front of me and effortlessly blocked all his attacks. Get lost. My brother burst into tears from fright. To cooperate with the investigation, Alexander and I also went to the police station, hearing everyone thank him again and again. "Thank you." Classmate Alexander left me strangely dazed. By the time we came out, the sky was growing dark. Alexander, who had maintained a polite smile all day, finally rubbed his aching cheeks. I still prefer you with red hair." He turned to me, about to say something, but I cut him off calmly. Alexander froze, then stressed, "The one with red hair is my brother." I stopped walking and told him, "Only Daniel can tell me what to do, and only Daniel can take me away." Alexander, or rather Daniel, who had once again swapped places with him, let out a laugh of anger. "Fine," he said, refusing to admit who he really was. Striding ahead, "Then stay here and wait. Let's see if he comes to pick you up." I stayed silent. Daniel left. Later that evening, the rain began to fall again. I found a bench by the roadside, sat down quietly, and wondered what I could still do for Daniel. Then, with growing frustration and helplessness, I realized that during this time it seemed like I'd only been causing trouble for him. It was completely different from when I had been at Alexander's side. No matter how much Alexander despised me, he could never point out a single mistake in how I handled things. I could always manage everything perfectly for Alexander. But why wasn't it the same now? I lowered my head, lost in thought, until a familiar voice drew closer through the rain. "Are you fucking stupid? It's raining and you don't even think to find some place to hide?" Chapter 23. It was Daniel, who had left only to return. He hadn't brought an umbrella either, running toward me drenched, and without a word tried to drag me along with him. "Daniel." I called his name and smiled. This time, I really don't have a home anymore. When I said it, there wasn't the slightest trace of sadness, only release. I had actually said something similar to Alexander once. That was the only time I had ever revealed my vulnerable side in front of him. But Alexander had replied, "Carolina, do you really think you're any better than your parents?" So I never said another word. But this time was different. This time, I had found Daniel. And so, summoning my courage, I carefully asked the question I had never voiced in my previous life. "So Daniel, could you take care of me once more?" Daniel fell silent for a moment. This time, he didn't deny it. Instead, he curled his lip and glared at me, gruffly. "When have I ever not taken care of you? I've practically been wiping your ass and spoon-feeding you like a baby." I couldn't help but laugh, though my eyes stung badly. Chapter 24. Daniel kept scolding me for being a block of wood. I call you little blockhead a few times. And you really think you're some piece of wood come alive, drinking rainwater to soak up the energy of heaven and earth? But when he caught sight of my wounds, his words of discipline caught in his throat. Finally, he forced out a few hoarse words. Those bastards, I should have kicked them a few more times when I had the chance. Then he started talking about other things, trying to distract me. Good, finally good. I thought you were mad at me. I stared at the bandages on my wounds in a daze. I said I'd repay you. But every time I only cause you trouble. I thought you were angry. And then I couldn't find you. Why would you think I was angry? Because you don't want those things brought up. If I don't want them brought up, does that mean no one else will ever talk about them? I can't shut everyone's mouths. Daniel laughed. Then told me, I wasn't angry. I just had some things to deal with those days. If I were really mad, would I have gone through so much trouble to save you? Only later did I learn that when the old incident was brought up again, Daniel's furious parents had dragged him back to the law household by force. He was worried I wouldn't be able to find him, that I'd overthink, that something might happen to me. So during those days, Daniel kept trying to figure out a way to escape. In the end, it was Alexander who suggested switching identities. So Daniel starved himself. He starved until he looked just as sickly as Alexander, and only then did they trade places, letting him slip out. But Daniel never told me any of this. He only said Daniel's identity wasn't fit to appear at the police station. So how did you recognize me? Clearly, that was what he was most curious about. He rubbed his chin. Even my parents couldn't tell us apart. I didn't know how to explain. It just seemed that whenever Daniel stood before me, I could recognize him instantly. If I had to describe it precisely, it was probably my subconscious fear. I was afraid that if I ever mistook someone else for Daniel, I'd never find him again. So I said, I won't mistake you a second time. Daniel thought I meant that I'd mistaken Alexander for him the first time we met. So he didn't dwell on it, he just laughed. Not long after, James came rushing over. He didn't say much, only patted my shoulder with reddened eyes and comforted me softly. Come on, your teacher's wife is waiting at home. Daniel didn't follow. As James was leading me away, Daniel suddenly called out, You trust me that easily? On his face was still that wild, flamboyant smile of a teenage boy, but I could somehow sense the careful caution hidden deep beneath it. So I thought for a moment and gave him my answer. I'm a block of wood. You know, and wooden people never bend. Once they believe something, they stick to it, no matter what. Daniel slowly let the smile slip from his face. Finally, he sighed and muttered under his breath, You really are one stubborn oddball. Chapter 25. My relationship with Daniel seemed to grow closer. He didn't run around as often anymore, and James grabbed him by the ear to make him start relearning high school material. An older brother should set a good example for his younger sister. Daniel had been ready to refuse, but when he caught me watching him, he swallowed his words. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, then tilted his head back with a long sigh. Fine. Because of that incident, no high school was willing to accept Daniel, so he had no choice but to study at James's home. Jordan hadn't been lying. Daniel really was extremely unbalanced in his studies. Even though he was mostly self-taught, his score on the standardized math exam was nearly perfect, but his liberal arts grades were a complete disaster. James, who taught Chinese, was so furious he couldn't resist grabbing a stick to beat him, raging, I swear you're deliberately trying to piss me off. That was when Daniel would suddenly become unusually obedient. He'd rein in his usual smirk, lower his head, and listen quietly to the scolding. A teenage boy over 8 meters tall, crouching like a pitiful child in front of the little old man, not daring to move. But the moment James looked away, Daniel would sneak a wink at me, clearly wearing the expression, I heard it, but I'm not changing, even now. With that dead pig not afraid of boiling water attitude. You're exactly like Daniel. I remembered the day James had slammed the desk and yelled that at me, and couldn't help pressing my lips together in a smile. The Daniel standing in front of me now was vibrant and real, so different from the cold, lifeless lines of text on the pages I had seen in my past life. So I kept thinking, I should do even more. Chapter 26. I went to meet the family of the girl who had been left in a vegetative state. The Law family had covered all of her medical expenses, and Daniel would often come to visit her. But her family believed firmly that Daniel was the one who had ruined their daughter's life. So every time he came, they would curse him out and drive him away. Even so, Daniel would return from time to time, quietly leaving things behind before walking off, though the things he left were always thrown back out. So when they heard I had come because of Daniel, the gentle smiles on their faces immediately disappeared. I'm not here to persuade you to forgive him. As they tried to shut the door on me, I quickly reached out to block it. The door slammed on my hand with a dull thud, my palm swelling red almost instantly. I barely even registered the pain, and almost pleaded, "Just give me a few minutes, please?" They looked at my hand, and finally fell silent. So I told them a story from James's point of view, from the perspective of those so-called delinquents Daniel had led, a story about Daniel. Then I took out a recording pen. It was the most expensive one that group of boys had scraped together their money to buy when they heard I was going to see this family. They'd said only the best could be worthy of Daniel. But in truth, it was because they had so much to say. The pen was filled with their voices. I don't have parents. My grandma raised me by picking through trash. Before I met Daniel, I never even knew people were supposed to eat 3 meals a day. That was fatty. No one would have guessed that before meeting Daniel. He had been so thin he was practically skin and bones. My parents divorced. Neither of them wanted me, so I became a thief. The person I stole from most was Daniel, but he never called the cops. Instead, he beat me up and then forced me to copy down the core socialist values. Steal once, get beaten once, copy it 100 times. That was Jordan. As he said it, he started reciting the values again in misery, only to be yanked away by the others in disgust. And me, my family has too many younger siblings, and we couldn't afford my schooling. Daniel paid for me to go, and when my grandma was sick and in the hospital, Daniel covered the medical expenses too. Every sentence in that recorder was filled with gratitude for Daniel. The girl's family listened in silence until the end, without saying a word. Finally, the mother couldn't hold back anymore. She covered her face and wept. The father, holding her in silence, his eyes red, said to me, "Actually, we knew. A truly guilty person would feel no remorse, especially when the law can't convict him." But Daniel kept coming. For 4 years. Even after I once beat him so badly he was covered in injuries, he didn't complain, and still came back the next time. We always knew. By then, his voice too had choked. But we had no other choice. Really, no other choice. They were just an ordinary family, with no way to afford their daughter's staggering medical costs. So the only way they could survive was to cling to the Law family in such a clumsy, desperate manner. I was speechless. I knew too well how poverty could crush people into despair, especially when life and death were involved. So though I opened my mouth, I couldn't bring myself to utter words of blame. "We'll speak up for him," the mother said, wiping her tears. "But our testimony won't matter much." Indeed, their words wouldn't clear Daniel's name. Instead, people would only assume the girl's parents had been bought off by the Law family. I know. I steadied my emotions and forced a smile. Only if Ruorua wakes up can his innocence be proven. We don't even know if Ruorua will ever wake up again. At this, the mother broke down into sobs once more. "She will," I said firmly, my eyes on the girl lying in the hospital bed. "She will wake up." This time, it was the parents who fell into stunned silence. When they sent me off, the father couldn't help but ask, "You trust him that much?" Even his own parents didn't believe he was innocent back then. Trust isn't the exact word. I thought for a moment, then looked out the window at the sunlight, remembering how Daniel always instinctively walked in the shadows the first time we met. I smiled. I just want Daniel to be able to walk openly in the sunlight. The father couldn't find words. At last, his gaze slipped past me, landing on someone behind. It was Daniel. Chapter 27. I didn't know how long Daniel had been standing there, or how much he had overheard. He only walked over as if nothing had happened, pressed down on my head, and apologized to Ruoruo's parents. "Sorry. This girl disturbed you." No, it's fine." Then Daniel set down the things he'd brought, said nothing more, and took me straight to see a doctor. He noticed right away the hand I had tried to hide. I should have just ignored it. "Let your hand rot, so you wouldn't even be able to take the college entrance exam." Daniel sneered, mocking me harshly. I lowered my head. Too guilty to say a word. Even the doctor couldn't bear it and tried to speak up on my behalf. But Daniel's sharp tongue spared no one. After leaving the hospital, Daniel stayed silent all the way. Finally, I couldn't hold back. Jordan and the others said you went out today. You think those brats can hide anything from me? Daniel tilted his head at me, amused. I can tell what kind of fart they're about to let out just by the way they stick their asses up. So I shut my mouth again. No other words you want to say to me? Yes, I thought about it. Then spoke. They believe it wasn't you who did that back then. But instead of surprise, Daniel's face remained calm. He only nodded lightly. I know. You know? Only by hating me do they have a reason to keep pushing forward. Daniel gave a small laugh. It doesn't really cost me anything. How could he say it cost him nothing? Because of this, he couldn't go to school, and he endured the scorn and insults of so many people. How could that be no loss? I was so anxious the word slipped out. If others call someone a saint, then you're basically a holy father. You're right. Daniel even nodded with certainty. If I weren't a holy father, I wouldn't have picked up a bunch of annoying little brats like you lot. I couldn't out-argue Daniel, so I just shut my mouth angrily. My eyes red as I glared at him. What are you crying for? I only realized I was already in tears when I felt the warmth sliding down my cheeks. Daniel sighed, pulled a small packet of tissues from his pocket, the kind with perfume and printed flowers, and handed them to me. You've cried yourself into a little spotted kitten. Didn't you say carrying tissues was a sissy thing to do? I snatched them from him, unable to resist snapping back. Yeah. Daniel grinned instantly. But aren't I playing both dad and mom for you? When it came to shamelessness, I was no match for Daniel. Seeing I was truly upset, he coaxed me gently again. He'd always been someone who could bend and stretch. But later, he suddenly asked, do you really believe she'll wake up? She will wake up. My tone was certain. Daniel froze. Then after a long moment, laughed softly and cursed, you damn girl. All right then, if she really does wake up, then you, my little block of wood, will be my lucky charm. But, he sighed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Thank you, both of you. Chapter 28. After we got back that day, I exaggerated the whole story when I told James. James immediately grabbed his belt and started spanking Daniel. But before he finished, tears welled up in James's own eyes. So Daniel didn't even dodge, he just took it. And while James hit him, he still comforted James gently. In truth, Daniel should have been the one comforted for the grievance he'd suffered. James realized that too. He threw down the belt, turned away, and wordlessly went with his wife to prepare a hearty lunch. When I finished tattling and caught Daniel glaring at me, I pulled a face at him. Daniel pretended to look stern and made a mock stabbing gesture, but then quickly broke into a smile. Only when I saw that smile did I suddenly realize how much I'd changed. The words people used to describe me now included alive and vivid. In my past life, all I received were descriptions like numb and calm madwoman. But maybe this is fine too, I told myself. I couldn't help but let a small smile slip out. Chapter 29. Everything seemed to be heading in a better direction. So much so that I almost forgot Daniel from my last life died at 17. And to this day I still don't know why he died. The Law family sealed off all the news. I wanted to ask Alexander, but he died in that kidnapping. After waking from a nightmare, I started acting like a startled bird again, reverting to my old self, paranoid and calmly unhinged. I went to see Alexander. I tried to get details from him about Daniel's death in the last life, then planned to avoid whatever came after. But Alexander refused to tell me, even when I begged on my knees. Before me he turned into that same haughty Mr. Law, speaking with scorn. So you want to protect my brother the same way you protected me in your past life? Carolina, don't even think about it. Maybe my kneeling set something off. Alexander's expression turned a little frantic. He crouched down close, grinning as he said, by the way, do you know why I became healthy in my past life? That's because what was beating in my chest was my brother's heart. I shot my head up and instinctively grabbed Alexander's lapel, only to have him pry my fingers away one by one. Then he said, word by word, you monster who doesn't understand what love is. Everything you do only becomes a burden and a pain. Carolina, why did you try to run away? Wouldn't it have been better if you just rotted in that house? Alexander, Daniel's furious voice cut him off. I was dazed for a moment. When I came to, Daniel and Alexander were grappling. Alexander didn't fight back, but whenever he glanced at me, that familiar mocking smile reappeared on his face. That magnified the panic in my chest 100-fold. So when Daniel took me away, I was completely out of it. "Don't listen to that brat," Daniel said, a little exasperated. "He's been acting weird lately, talking nonsense at home. Don't take it to heart." I kept staring blankly at the ground. Then I heard Daniel give a faint, almost inaudible sigh. He loosened his hold on my hand, took 2 steps forward, then turned and opened his arms to me. "Want to come cry into your one-man parents' arms?" His tone was teasing, but I couldn't be bothered to be angry with him. I clung to Daniel with everything I had, hugging him so hard I could feel myself trembling. "What are you afraid of?" He patted my back like comforting a child. "You're grown, stop being such a crybaby." "Daniel. Daniel." I kept calling his name over and over, as if that alone could give me the strength to go on. In the end, with my voice breaking, I said, "I don't want you to die, Pa, Pa, Pa." "Of course I'm not going to die." Daniel made a few disgusted noises, pretending to scoff. His chin rested on the top of my head, so I couldn't see how gentle his eyes were right then. All I heard was him say, "I won't die." After all, I still have to accompany this future top scorer through the college entrance exams and take her on TV. Then we'll tell the whole country, this year's top scorer is a crybaby. Chapter 30. But Daniel still broke his promise. He almost died trying to save them. Daniel ended up rescuing 3 drowning girls, but the last girl, struggling wildly, kicked Daniel hard several times. Daniel couldn't surface. When I got there after receiving the news, I stared blankly at the calm river and felt my limbs go cold. He groped me. The girl who had been pulled out cried. He kept touching me, so I kicked him away. That wasn't how someone like him saves people. Everyone comforted the girl. Some people who knew Daniel even said, "I knew he wasn't that benevolent, he's done stuff like this before." A nameless fury surged up in me, but I forced it down. This was not the time to rage. I looked at the water, and uncontrollably the sensation of drowning from my past life rushed back. I was terrified. I shook with fear. Still, I charged forward despite everything. Because Daniel was there. I had to find Daniel. But Alexander stopped me. He held me tight, his voice trembling. "You can't swim. If you go in, you'll die. I've already sent someone to save my brother. Don't worry. He'll be fine." I couldn't hear any of it. I tore and bit at Alexander like a wild animal. Alexander grit his teeth and groaned, refusing to let go of me. Not until Daniel was pulled out, given emergency CPR, and rushed away in an ambulance did Alexander finally relent. I collapsed to the ground as if all my strength had drained out, nearly suffocating. Then I heard someone say, "Scum like that should just die." I stiffened and turned toward that person. Whenever Daniel was around, he confiscated every sharp thing I had. But after that dream, I had secretly hidden another knife without his knowledge. When the people around me saw me pull it out, screams of horror rose up, but I couldn't hear or see anything. Everything before me was the color of blood. I had always known there was a complete lunatic living in my heart. Only Daniel could bind that lunatic, lock every escape route away. But Daniel wasn't there. Daniel is here. Alexander's roar ripped through the noise and landed clearly in my ears. He clutched his chest, his face in pain, but forced himself forward step by step. "Daniel won't be harmed. But if you get hurt, have you thought about how devastated Daniel will be when he wakes up? You think you're the only one who wants to save him? I want to, too. Or are you just a coward through and through, too afraid to face Daniel?" Alexander looked at me in agony, veins bulging at his neck. I stared at him in a daze as he approached. Then he suddenly snatched the knife from my hand. "I'll take you to see Daniel." He was trembling even more than I was. "I'll take you to see him." Chapter 31. Daniel was rescued, but because he had been underwater for too long, he fell into a prolonged coma. The only good news was that Daniel had a strong will to survive. In his previous life, Daniel didn't have the will to live. Alexander was silent for a long time before he rasped to me. He said that long ago, a highly respected abbot had once told Daniel's fortune, saying that he would face a deadly calamity. If he endured it, the rest of his life would be peaceful and smooth. But Daniel had always been energetic and mischievous since childhood, and he rarely even got sick. It was Alexander who had always been frail and sickly, so the Law family had never really taken that prophecy seriously. Until Daniel died. He died without any desire to live. It was Daniel who was determined to die. I couldn't stop him. Alexander cried and laughed at the same time. I stopped him once, but I never thought there would be a next time. If Daniel really wanted to die, no one could stop him. I listened numbly, without any emotional reaction. Alexander said a lot more, probably about what had happened in that past life. But without Daniel, I couldn't really take it in. I don't want Daniel to die, and I don't want you to die either. When he was leaving, Alexander suddenly said that. He looked at me, his face twisted in a smile uglier than crying, but I didn't expect that even after I said this, you would still insist on staying by Daniel's side. So, Carolina, go ahead and hate me. I still didn't answer him. Chapter 32. Daniel slept for a long time. I stayed with him in the hospital for more than a week. In the end, James couldn't stand it anymore and forced me out of the hospital with a heavy heart. Do you think having good grades gives you the right to do whatever you want? His eyes were still red. Yet he still scolded me harshly. Don't you want to be the top scorer in the college entrance exam anymore? Daniel is still waiting to go on TV with you for the interview. I looked blankly at James, not knowing what to say. Maybe I looked too pitiful like that. Because James softened a little. He made me promise over and over not to fall behind in my studies, and finally agreed to let me come at night to keep Daniel company. During Daniel's sleep, many things happened. For example, Ruorua woke up. On the second day after she regained consciousness, her parents called the police, and the still weak Ruorua forced herself to testify to prove Daniel's innocence. And also, that girl whom Daniel had saved, the one who had slandered him by accusing him of harassment, was sued by the Law family. Alexander produced a recording pen, and everyone could clearly hear that girl's unscrupulous mocking voice. Who told Daniel to reject my confession? Besides, he already had a bad reputation. Isn't it normal for him to take advantage of me while saving me? And it's not like I wanted to kick him. Anyone would have a reflex at a time like that, right? Even if Daniel really died. That's not my fault. So don't you dare blame me. Just like that, Daniel instantly went from being called trash and worthless to being praised by everyone as a hero. More and more people came to visit him at the hospital. Sometimes I couldn't even squeeze in. Eventually, the Law family took Daniel abroad for treatment. In fact, the Law family had already contacted foreign brain specialists a long time ago. It was only because Alexander pleaded on your behalf that they flew an expert in from overseas. But some equipment isn't available here yet, so Daniel has to be transferred abroad as soon as possible. James patted my shoulder, comforting me. Focus on your studies. Maybe one day Daniel will see you on TV. I quietly looked at the empty hospital bed and replied softly, For Daniel to survive at all was already more than enough. Chapter 33. Everything seemed to return to normal. I went to school and came back as usual, then worked part-time to support myself. Sometimes Jordan and the others would come find me, pretending to be fierce as they asked if anyone had bullied me, so that they could go teach that person a lesson. Every time that happened, James would catch them by the ear and give them a long scolding. They would obediently admit their mistakes, but repeat the same thing next time. No one mentioned Daniel, as if he had never existed, until the following summer. When I was in my second year of high school, I arrived early for class, only to find a familiar figure sitting in my seat. I stared at the back of that figure, frozen in place. A few classmates who had also come early were whispering, isn't that Alexander from No. 1 high school? That's strange. My friend from No. 1 said they saw Alexander early this morning, and he seemed to be in a great mood. Doesn't Alexander have a twin brother? His name is Daniel. I blurted it out in a rush. Daniel turned around, his face carrying that mischievous grin I knew all too well. It's been a while, and even our little block of wood has grown into such a pretty flower, he teased, stroking his chin as if in deep thought. What a miracle. Turns out even a wooden block can bloom beautifully. I couldn't speak. My vision blurred, and through that blur, I watched Daniel walk step by step toward me, just like back then in that alley, when he had walked toward me against the light. Then he reached out his hand, The smile on his face was as radiant and flamboyant as ever. He said, "Little block of wood, I've come to see you."